The United States president, the Orange Man, Donald Trump, has invaded Venezuela and has kidnapped the president, Nicolas Maduro. The death toll was 100 on the Venezuelan side and 0 on the American side. And after his kidnapping, the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, took power, which is very suspicious because in this operation, we only saw 2 political leaders kidnapped, right? Nicolas Maduro and his wife, while the rest of the political establishment in Venezuela was kept untouched. And no American casualties also signals a giant red flag for me in terms of there potentially being some internal betrayal. So we're going to look into all of that and also go into a little bit of the history behind Venezuela and what could happen next. You're watching the Eurozone broadcast. If you're watching live, feel free to drop some questions as we go along or even push back. I'm sure we're going to get into some sensitive leftist topics where a lot of infighting starts to take place. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and comment. We do live streams every Saturday, so feel free to drop by. Now, the reason I think the most interesting point we can start at is this idea of an internal betrayal. Reason being that something looks completely off in this invasion by the Americans. Let's see here. There's one question already. Probably with the threat of full-blown violence as the alternative. Yeah. So we'll get into that. What are the options, as this chatter is saying, that was given to the Venezuelans? It could be that Maduro, for example, decided to avoid a full-blown conflict and therefore gave himself up, essentially. But here are the facts that I think show without a doubt that something is completely off, something is wrong, and the official story that was given to us by Donald Trump makes no sense. First fact being, not one American casualty. Not one American was died in combat, and not one helicopter was downed by the Venezuelans. And in fact, the Americans lost none of their tech. So not one soldier, not one piece of equipment. Venezuelan troops were at home because of New Year's leave. This this one to me is almost like Jeffrey Epstein died and the cameras happened to be turned off. That's crazy. I'm sorry, what? So you're telling me Nicolas Maduro was handing out thousands of weapons to the militias, to his militiamen, right, to the civilians of Venezuela, and he said that if the Americans come, I will declare a country in arms, which means that every man, woman, and child basically goes from being a civilian to a combatant and will resist this invasion. Now, going from that, by the way, to already they already had a lot of warning shots being fired, right, at the boats that were leaving Venezuela, the oil tankers being seized by the Americans. The Americans had a whole fleet of ships waiting at the coast of Venezuela. And you're telling me that Nicolas Maduro, who was well aware and was seemingly doing preparations, did not think about canceling the annual New Year's leave of all the soldiers? I mean, there's one case where one of the biggest military bases in Venezuela was bombed, and there was only 2 casualties on the Venezuelan side. I am not celebrating, that I'm not saying that more people should have died, obviously. I'm just saying that it's very suspicious that one of the biggest military bases only had 2 people inside who then unfortunately died because of these American strikes. So something is very fishy. And I've seen a lot of people say that, okay, but that's because the Venezuelan military is very weak. It's very, in the end of the day, it is an impoverished country because of American sanctions. And they simply had no capabilities of shooting down any American helicopters. But that is not true. And so I'm gonna show you here exactly what I mean. So if we take a look here, this is just Wikipedia, but I like to use it for military statistics. This is the arsenal that the Bolivarian military, so the Venezuelan military, have to their disposal in the air forces. They have 3 F-16 fighting Falcons from the United States. These are pretty intense fighting planes, by the way. And then they have 14 Russian Sukhoi Su-30, and they have some other planes here that are more transport and tanker and so on. But still, not one of these aircrafts were deployed to protect their president. Any one of these aircrafts could easily shoot down a helicopter. By the way, there is a massive leap between helicopter and an F-16, right? I see one chat saying, pretty sure they didn't get any spare parts for those F-16s. Yeah, look, these were given a long time ago, as you can see, 1982. But the Russian flights could still work. And so there is an argument here that maybe these planes were just for show and they don't actually work. However, you don't need to have an airplane to shoot down a helicopter, right? This is the full list of things that the artillery and so on, all the equipment that the Venezuelan military has. And very interesting, apart from the aircraft, helicopters, air defense. Here we go. This is the air defense systems that the Venezuelans had at their disposal and as part of the military. And by the way, although it is an impoverished country, it is one of the most militarized countries in Latin America, right? They have 4 million active militia men and women, okay? And that's not even counting the military. So outside of the military, they have 4 million civilians that have weapons, who are part of the Bolivarian militias. And now I'm going to show you what they actually have in the military for air defense. And if you look here, first and foremost, 12 S-300s, which are long-range surface-to-air missiles, Russian-made. These are the same ones that Russia is using right now against Ukraine, by the way. Again, against an F-16 or a fighter jet, perhaps it could be that you cannot hit it with one of these simply because the fighter jet is too fast or because your radar systems were disabled, as the Americans are saying they did. But against a helicopter, you could easily use some of these weapons. Even if, for whatever reason, let's say all of these surface-to-air long and medium-range weapons were out of service, they have, like any other military on Earth, thousands of handheld devices that shoot missiles surface-to-air to protect against an attack from the air, right? An attack from the skies. These not very hard to acquire. These are quite common amongst military, and what I've seen is that they have at least 4,000 of these in the Venezuelan military. So any one person could have picked up one of these rockets and shot them directly at the helicopters, because again, the helicopters move quite slow. So it's not like you're shooting a jet that's flying by, and the helicopters had to land in Caracas and around Caracas in order to take out President Maduro. And you're telling me that not a single soldier attempted to shoot them down? This is near impossible. It's not like the American strikes were so mortifying like we saw in Iraq with the shock and awe that they destroyed the entire city. They only went after a few locations where these long-range missiles were, and then bombed the main military base in Caracas before moving to the presidential palace where Nicolás Maduro was stationed. So the likelihood that the Venezuelan army fought back in full fury, for me, is zero. It's simply not possible. So one thing is for sure, the Venezuelan military did not respond to this invasion with what they could have. It was not a real fight. Okay, and out of that, there's a lot of possibilities for why. I'm not going to pretend like I know why that is the case, but I do see 4 different possibilities. I think it would be good just to quickly review this video from Bad Empanada before we get into the 4 possibilities. And as you'll see, he shares the same view that it is very, it would be foolish to, at this point, say with confidence what exactly happened. He did upload another video just yesterday, and again, he said that we have more questions than answers. So let's quickly watch this video. I think it just recaps what I said quite nicely and also provides some ground footage of the situation.
With the coming of Hugo Chavez. Well, it seems that now they may be getting that. Now take everything from this point onwards as very preliminary, as something of a speculation, because I don't know what happened yet. You don't know what happened yet. No one really understands what exactly has happened yet. The dust is still clearing. We don't know if more is going to happen. There is no clear evidence as I film this regarding the extent of the damage done, regarding how many people have died and whether they were military members or civilians. The Americans have claimed that no Americans died, and in fact there was only minor injuries and only one helicopter received minor damage, which sounds very suspicious, doesn't it? So I'm sure you've seen a lot of the footage that's been circulating of American helicopters just sort of flying around Caracas with free rein, with very little return fire against them, barely even any small arms fire being heard in the background. It all kind of reeks, and it especially reeks because of something that Trump said. Trump said that the vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, is willing to work with the US. Trump said that she had expressed her willingness to do whatever the US asked. Trump also said regarding the opposition, the Venezuelan opposition, who up until now he seemed to have been supporting, that he's basically not going to make them leaders. He said about Maria Corina Machado, the recent Nobel Prize winner, by the way, that it would be very tough for her to be the leader, and that he hasn't spoken to her, and that though she's a very nice woman, she doesn't...
Sorry, I had to pause. For the right-wing people in South America, you fell for it again. I'm sorry, it's just hilarious. Like, all of these people that thought that Trump was going to be your savior and was going to replace the communist regime of Nicolas Maduro with the supposed mandate of the people, democratic leader Machado, yeah, you fell for it again. Donald Trump does not care about who you want to lead the country. He cares about who is going to give him the resources of your country. So, yeah, you fell for it again. Machado was immediately sidelined. Trump was like, yeah, I really don't care about her. And we're going to discuss some of the reasons why. But basically, Machado has no allies inside of the military. And Venezuela is a highly militarized country. So he doesn't think that she is going to have the raw, violent power to be able to stop any local resistance to Trump taking all the oil. So instead, he went with the vice president. But yeah, let's continue.
Have the support within or the respect of the country. This is extremely fishy, isn't it? What the fuck happened here? There's also videos that have come out, for example, of damage in Venezuela after these strikes at some of the military bases that were attacked. And it almost looks token. It almost doesn't look that serious. Like I saw an article in the Venezuelan newspaper El Nacional, which now I, of course, can't find, that said that in at least some of the bases that were attacked, perhaps all of them, don't really know, obviously I'm speculating here, as I said, this is all preliminary, there were almost no personnel because the troops had been sent home for the New Year's festivities. That seems suspicious, right? If we look at this video here from Venezuelan State TV, they sent a car out to assess the damage at one of the military barracks that had been attacked.
Muy atentos porque les vamos a mostrar las imágenes del punto donde ocurrió el ataque. Vamos a parar el vehículo.
We have a military base with some bombed out buses, civilian-looking buses too. These must be like transports to get the troops to and from work or something.
Aquí, y ahora sí, los vamos a bajar para mostrarles a ustedes.
There is one single bombed out APC that looks like it was parked. Maybe not. I don't know. You guys are more military.
So this would be the long-range surface-to-air missiles, right? That he's referencing here that does look like it's bombed. But again, if anyone else in this military base picked up their weapons, they could have shot down some of the helicopters just with the handheld equipment that they have. And even, by the way, like just with a normal gun, of which they have plenty in Venezuela, you can still shoot at people coming out of a helicopter.
Mine and can tell me if this looks like any of this stuff was in action or not.
Sí, las imágenes del ataque. Actualmente las reacciones internacionales son de completo agravio y estupor. Una unidad que...
So we have some buses with destroyed windows, a bombed out APC, cars right next to these buses that seem to be in perfect condition, like that car right there on the right of the screen. The windows were destroyed, probably from the shockwave of the explosions, but the building wasn't actually directly hit.
Fue destruida, en este caso un autobús rojo.
This bus looks like it was more substantially hit.
Tenemos otra unidad que también fue destruida.
These are just buses.
Podemos ver la reja. Esto que ustedes ven aquí son las esquirlas, producto de la deflagración de los explosivos. Allá inclusive tenemos un poste que fue arrancado de cuajo, precisamente por este fenómeno que les estamos.
So this is very suspicious, right? A lot of the damage coming out of Venezuela that is being filmed on the state TV is just images of infrastructure, or as in this case buses, and then one military vehicle that was damaged. So very little damage compared to what would have to take place to completely immobilize the entire military of Venezuela.
Estamos comentando de las esquirlas, de los explosivos que fueron utilizados en la mañana. Hay cuerpos de seguridad que están presentes. Un poco más atrás tenemos funcionarios militares que nos están haciendo señas. Obviamente ellos están.
It looks like there are two people in this space who this guy is able to see.
Están custodiando el perímetro, están haciendo su trabajo si se quiere. Pero bueno, lo que podemos reportar es esto. Estamos ofreciendo en vivo y en directo las imágenes de lo que fue el ataque.
There are weirdly very little images of damage like this that have come out so far. You're probably going to be seeing more of them throughout the day, maybe tomorrow. There is, from what I've been able to find, zero assessment of the casualties, anything like that. I have no idea how many people died, no idea how many civilians.
Since then, we do know that right below 100 people died. So almost 100 people died. So this video was posted the day after the invasion, the morning of, I think. So yeah, we do know since then that 100 people died on the Venezuelan side.
Civilians died. The only comment that I've seen on this came from Delcy Rodriguez, where she said in a statement that civilians and military members have died, without giving a number, without giving any real concrete information. But this was quite a while ago now. This was like 7-8 hours ago. Additionally, the only video that I have been able to find, again, I could be wrong here, the only clips that I've seen of Venezuelan troops or any sort of Venezuelan military presence were not actually going towards the fight with the Americans or anything. They were all just doing crowd control on Venezuelans. Like I saw one clip, this one right here, which is the only one that I've seen of Venezuelan troops. There's also another one of a random APC going through the street very slowly. It's not even worth showing. And they are just like, they just seem to be telling random civilians to go inside. Like they stopped this person on a motorcycle and then just seem to leave them there.
Mira. Ay, papi, también chorreado.
They just seem to be stopping civilians and telling them to fucking go home or something. They seem to be more directed at getting people to seek shelter than actually fighting the Americans. Like, this is a crowd control operation. This isn't a military resistance.
Mira.
Yeah, they just tell the guy on the motorcycle, get the fuck out of here, and he goes. They tell the cars to get out of there, and they go.
Bajando a la gente. Mira. Mira, parando carro. Están, bueno, me imagino que están defendiendo la posición, pero no les va a durar mucho. No, van a ir por ellos, Mira esto.
Now, there's something very fishy about all of this, okay? Something doesn't add up. Even if the US had literally perfectly managed to airstrike all of Venezuela's air defenses. Now, I'm not going to say...
So now he goes into basically the same details that I went through. But yeah, all of this is to say that we have no footage of Venezuelan soldiers actually fighting the Americans, and the only footage we have is of them trying to establish some sort of crowd control. So I am under no impression that there was a genuine fight back from the Venezuelan military. It seems like the only people that didn't know this was happening was the personal guard of Nicolas Maduro, because that is where most of the casualties were. And it seems like those were the only people that hit 2 American soldiers, because 2 American soldiers are wounded. But again, no casualties. So let's go through the 4 possibilities then. So what actually happened instead? The first possibility, I have to say, is that the Venezuelan army was just so weak that they could not shoot a single American. Who is trying to convince you of this? Well, Donald Trump and the general right wing is convinced that Donald Trump did an amazing military exercise in which he managed to overthrow a government, take out their leader, and that the American military is so powerful that not a single American died. despite Venezuela being a highly militarized country. So if this view is correct and Venezuelans are simply incapable of hitting any targets with their weapons, again, I think that's very unlikely. But if this view is correct, then what you should see happen next is total dominance of Venezuela, because this would mean that there was no negotiation. It's simply the case that the American military is able to completely overrun the Venezuelan military, and therefore there would be no reason to deal with Venezuela as if there's any pushback that the Venezuelans could give. So if this first potential possibility, if this first scenario is what happened, then you should expect to see Venezuela hand over their country on a silver platter to the Americans, because there is no possibility of them pushing back. I think this is the least likely, for the reasons that we already reviewed. Then number 2, he was betrayed and the military stood down. Okay, who wants you to believe this one? The CIA and mainstream media is writing a lot of pieces saying, or at least hinting, at the idea that the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, betrayed her country and Nicolas Maduro, and basically ordered the military to stand down and let Maduro go. And this would be without Maduro knowing, right? This one is slightly more likely because she did take power. Trump did immediately acknowledge her as being the leader of Venezuela that he was going to deal with. And Nicolas Maduro's personal guard did not stand down. That is the only real fight we saw, is between the personal protective guard of Nicolas Maduro, which is mostly run by Cubans, and between the Americans. That is the only place we saw an actual gunfight, right? So this one is slightly more likely, but again, I'm not going to make any determinations on what I think happened because I don't have enough information. I'm just going to give you the different potential possibilities. If this second possibility is true, then what you will see is the vice president will maintain power. The military will join. So basically, the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, will make a deal with Trump, give him all or at least most of his demands, and any left-wing resistance to this inside of Venezuela will be put down by the Venezuelan military. This is what you should expect to see if this was if the second possibility is what happened. Okay, third possibility. He made a deal with Trump to save himself. So the third possibility is that Nicolas Maduro made a deal to basically sell out his country and in turn save himself and not get killed. This one, kind of interesting, mainly because his wife was also kidnapped. His wife is not really a strong political figure, and I don't see any reason for why she needs to stand trial in the US, even under the false pretenses of the Americans. So there is some possibility of this being true. The ones who want you to think this are the center-right and the neoliberals and some of the leftists as well. So these are mainly, let's say, the European left who is saying that Nicolas Maduro was a terrible leader. He's basically a treacherous guy who doesn't hold any values, and therefore, as soon as the Americans came knocking, he was like, "Hey, I'll do whatever you want. Just make sure that my wife and I stay safe." And they want you to think this because they are convinced, or are trying to convince you, that Nicolas Maduro is a complete sham, that he doesn't stand for any genuine values, right? If this is the case, then what you would expect to see next is complete chaos. And what I mean by that is, if Maduro truly sold out his country without any backup plan, without caring for his country, in return for safe passage to the US, where he will be put on some sham trial, maybe he'll say that Nicolas, that they were indeed involved in the 2016 elections or 2020 elections, like Trump is trying to get him to do. If you don't know, Trump is convinced the 2020 elections were stolen. And one of the lies he's telling about this election is that it was stolen using technology from Venezuela. So maybe he gives that to Donald Trump, and in court he says that indeed the 2020 election was stolen by Venezuela. So this is one potential outcome. And I think if you see some sort of deal where the Russians get Ukraine and the Americans get Venezuela, that this could be part of that play. So all of this would point towards the third scenario being what happened. The fourth and last scenario is that he offered himself in some 5-dimensional chess maneuver, and basically as a way to commence this war on a higher footing, he said, okay, I will offer myself to give the Venezuelans more time to prepare. And I will leave my country in good hands with specific instructions to the vice president, who does have ties to the genuine socialist revolution in Venezuela. And by doing that, will set up Venezuela to have a much stronger ability to resist American imperialism. This one, I have no idea. It really, I don't know if this is the case, but the ones who want you to believe this are the communists. So the far left are set on this idea that Nicolas Maduro is a great guy, that he is a true revolutionary, a true anti-imperialist, and a true socialist that cares for his people and therefore would never betray his people. They also don't fall for the CIA propaganda, right? Which was option 2, that he was betrayed by the military. And therefore they think that this move was coordinated between the military, the vice president, and Nicolas Maduro. If this is the case, then of course what you will expect to see is a prolonged guerrilla war in order to stop the Americans from looting the Venezuelan country. Yeah, so those are the 4 possibilities. I told you guys I would break it down. As I said, I unfortunately cannot give you a concrete answer as to which one of these 4 actually happened, but we'll keep a close eye on it. And now I have set out my predictions for the future, so that we can go back later and see, okay, which one of these seems to have been most likely. Because I think each one of the scenarios has clear outcomes that will play out, right? Now, going into why exactly this happened, because a lot of there's going to be a lot of misinformation and conflicting narratives here, and people trying to convince you that this happened because the Americans and the Europeans care about freedom and democracy and the well-being of the Venezuelan people, and of course that's an absolute lie. So why did this actually happen? Well, there is something in America called the Monroe Doctrine. And this is the belief that the United States has the right to dominate all of North and South America and all of the resources in these 2 continents. Ooh, sorry, my internet I thought went out. No, we're still here. We're live. Okay. Yeah. So in order to support that,
the Monroe Doctrine is a big.
Let me start again. So yeah, I don't think I need to show you more evidence than this video that this is the main reason why Donald Trump attacked Venezuela, because he comes out and says it himself. People were speculating about this for a long time. This was a far left conspiracy theory until Donald Trump this week came out and said it verbatim. Here you go.
The Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Monroe document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again.
President Trump isn't denying the possibility of further.
So there you go. Donald Trump saying very, very clearly that the reason that he attacked Venezuela is because he is reviving the Monroe Doctrine. and calling it the Monroe Doctrine, by the way, because of course he's a fucking master of words. And that's the primary reason. The Americans believe that they have the right to all of the resources in North and South America because they're strong enough to do it, and might makes right. But why is that case? Why is that the case? Why was the Monroe Doctrine necessary for the American survival? And why is it now necessary again? So we're going to go through the different systems that fuel the need for such a doctrine. First and foremost, imperialism. Okay? And as a lot of you lefties will know, imperialism is the end stage of capitalism, right? So why is that the case? Because capitalism requires infinite growth, right? Capitalism requires for the capital holders to see their capital expand forever. And in order to do this, because you live in a capitalist system, you must do it through exploitation. And once you have exploited the working class, and once you have exploited all of the natural resources in your own country, you have to look elsewhere in order to continue expanding. And that's when imperialism starts to take place. And again, in case you don't believe me, I have this clip.
Early in American history, when we...
in case you don't believe me, I have this clip here lined up from, what's his name? Sorry. The Daily Show. Jon Stewart. There we go. I have this clip from Jon Stewart, who very nicely puts together all of the times that Donald Trump has directly admitted that the only reason why they are going into Venezuela is because of oil. So here you go.
Intervene in another country, whether true or not, we come up with a high-minded pretense. Liberating a people, spreading democracy, introducing baseball to the Japanese. They complained at first, but it was totally worth it. On what moral foundation will this conflict be framed?
We're going to have presence in Venezuela as it pertains to oil, but we're going to get the oil flowing the way it should be.
Seems a little on the nose. Oil, precious commodity, certainly, but not the reason a country formed 250 years ago on the ideas of liberty and self-determination would go into a country and snatch a man at night.
Now, of course, Jon Stewart is a liberal, so he's trying to frame this as something that is uncommon for the Americans. You know, he just mentioned there how America was formed on the principles of liberation and freedom. Sure. As we just discussed, the Monroe Doctrine is a very old practice that completely goes against those ideals. So don't get fooled here. Of course, America has never had these ideals. The only difference is that Trump is doing us a favor by explicitly saying it out loud. So let's continue.
There must be a slightly more noble pretense.
We're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground.
We need total access. We need access to the oil.
Sir, again, I see where we're going here. Do you mind just reframing that? I'm not quite clear on the high-minded principle behind this.
In other words, we'll be selling oil.
Is this your first war? I mean, what the f***? All right, let's table this for now. Senator Lindsey Graham, you're an old hand at warmongering. You've done this a bunch. You're on the plane. Can you help this dude out with the casus belli and keep Trump from bringing it back to oil?
There are going to be Americans alive today because he shut down a narco-terrorist state called Venezuela. This is a good thing, not a bad thing.
And the oil companies are going to go in and rebuild their system.
That was perfect. Because there you have Lindsey Graham, this little demon here on the left, trying to recenter, right, this poor liberal's worldview, who is losing his mind here on the right, because Donald Trump is making both of their lives impossible, right? Lindsey Graham and the liberal are both in agreement that whenever they go in and do their imperialism in another country, they need to masquerade it in a facade of, caring about human rights and bringing democracy to these countries. But the orange man in the middle simply refuses to play part in these shenanigans and just says, no, we're doing it for the oil. And the guy here is astonished and he's like, okay, I guess we don't need to lie anymore. And the liberal loses his mind.
God damn it! What?
Because now the liberal has to grapple with the idea that the United States only cares about resource extraction and has never cared about bringing democracy and freedom to countries, right? His role, by the way, would usually be that, yes, I agree with the goal of bringing democracy and freedom to these countries, but let's do it in a way that is more humane because currently we have killed 2 million Iraqis, right? Like that was his job during the Iraq War, was to say, as a liberal, I care about human rights. So therefore, when we are bringing human rights to Iraq, we should not kill 2 million of them, but maybe just a few thousand, right? So this is a perfect illustration of the the trio emerging in American politics. These three different groups. So it was, of course, for the extraction of resources from Venezuela, because all American industries need, first and foremost, oil, and Venezuela has the largest reserve of oil in the world. And in case you did not know already, oil does not grow on trees. It is a finite resources that will run out at some point. And so the Americans are desperate to get their hands on more oil. This is why they are eager to support Israel, because they also maintain this resource extraction model. This is why they are eager to topple the government of Iran. Don't forget that the Iranian Western conflict started in the 60s and 70s because the Iranians nationalized their oil. And likewise, this conflict with Venezuela started because Hugo Chavez nationalized the oil and stopped the American companies from looting this oil, which they again need for all of their industries to fuel this capitalist machine. Another thing that the Venezuelans have is gold. Huge mines of gold. As a Bolivian, I know this very much because we also have gold. That is why the Spanish came to conquer us back in the day. And that is why the Americans are there now. Gold is extremely important in this new world where the petrodollar is falling. The American dollar is going to lose dominance and become irrelevant. And because of that, the rich need somewhere else to put their money, and that's going to be gold. They also have iron. Don't forget that, by the way, during World War II, the South Americans provided 60% of all of the iron used to build the war machinery that the Allies needed to win in World War II. And the Venezuelans supplied 60% of the oil that the British used to fuel these machines. So it's not the first time that the Europeans and the Americans are relying on our resources in South America in order to fuel their economies and their wars. Not only is it not the first time, this is actually just the status quo. This has been what Europe and the United States have been doing since the times of colonialism, right? And the last resource is, of course, lithium, which you need for lithium batteries, and silver, which also you need for electronics. So the first reason, the biggest reason for why this is happening is that resource extraction, which is necessary for capitalism, where resource extraction has already hit its limits internally, and therefore you must go to the exterior and find other countries where you can extract resources. The second biggest reason is the military-industrial complex, another form of capitalism. So it all starts and ends with capitalism. I'm just describing the top priorities of capitalism in order to that culminate in the need to invade Venezuela and take the resources, right? So the first is just resource extraction. The second is fueling the military-industrial complex. As we just described, South America has long been where most of the resources for the European and American militaries come from, and this is still the case. So they want to make money from war, and this is another war. The military-industrial complex have never met a war they don't like, and they are back at it again, making more profits. We saw their stock market, their stock price in the stock market jump 20% as soon as they invaded Venezuela. And they're obviously making a shit ton of money from this, which is one of the biggest industries in America. And it's international, by the way. It's also a big industry in Europe. Yeah, even Sweden, the UK, France, they're all huge arm dealers. And of course, the third, but still important reason for why this had to happen, again, fundamentally because of capitalism, is to stop all socialist projects around the world. In this case, the Venezuelan Socialist Project. And this is nothing new. In order to prove this point, all I have to do is list you all of the governments in South America and the year that they were overthrown because these governments were leftist. Some of them were put in via military coups, but most of these governments were actually democratically elected. So never forget that the Americans and Europeans are perfectly fine with overthrowing democratically elected leaders and putting in right-wing fascist dictators as long as the people that they are overthrowing are from the left. So the list is Guatemala, 1954, Brazil, 1964, Bolivia, 1971. Bolivia mentioned, let's go. Chile, 1973. Cuba, this one failed, the Bay of Pigs, in 1961. But the rest of these, by the way, were all successful. Venezuela also failed in 2002. Granada, 1983. And then, of course, we have Operation Condor, which, right now I went through already 50 years of history, but Operation Condor was a particularly bloody one from the 70s to the 80s, where they went in and did a second round in a lot of countries. So in Argentina, you had the military junta, 1976. In Chile, you had Pinochet. And for those of you who are South American, you will recognize these names as some of the worst fascists of human history that killed thousands, if not millions, of the local populations. But in case you didn't know, because you might be European or American, the names I am saying now are akin to Hitler and Mussolini for us South Americans. Pinochet was a terrible man who ruled with an iron fist and made thousands, hundreds of thousands of people disappear. And I know personally people who are still not able to go back to these countries because they were tried under military courts in mass courts, right? They would bring in 1,000 people and in one swing of the gavel officially make them all guilty, charge them guilty with crimes that they did not commit, and they would just basically imprison thousands at the time in this way. And for those that managed to escape, a lot of them can still not go back to South America from these times. In Uruguay, you had the military dictatorship in 1973, Paraguay, 1954, Bolivia we already mentioned, but yeah, I just want to say it was the Hugo Banzer dictatorship, this scum of the earth, Hugo Banzer. And in Brazil, of course, the military dictatorship again in 1964. So all of these were supported or directly done by the Americans, by the American military. So there's nothing new here, right? This is just a huge effort to constantly and consistently stop socialist or leftist governments from taking over in South America. And again, the reason for that is that capitalists don't like socialists because it stops them from being able to do resource extraction. There was a small pause since those times. I think the last one we see here is 1989, right? So in the 90s and early 2000s, we had like a 20, almost 30-year pause where the outright military intervention was paused by the Americans, and instead they went more into soft power. They have USAID, which helps achieve some of this. And basically they looked at softer ways to achieve the same means, right? So getting involved in political campaigns, doing some dirty work with the embassies in the local countries, and of course using aid as a constant conditional measure. So to say, hey, now that you're impoverished because we assassinated all of your left leaders, and now that all of the American companies run your economy, and because of that your local population have no food, if you don't want the local population to rise up against you and lynch you essentially, then you need our aid. And our aid comes on a condition that you do X, Y, and Z as your next policy, right? So this is the system they used between the 80s, the late 80s and the early 2000s. But that system has now been abandoned by Donald Trump, who said, this system is bogus. We don't want to supply aid to all these countries, even if it is an influencing mechanism. Instead, we want to go back to the Monroe Doctrine and use a strong force, brute force diplomacy. And there is a reason for this. Number one, I mentioned, because resources are becoming finite, right? So we're entering dangerous territory where we might go into a resource war very soon. Number two, capitalism is struggling to expand further. So then, again, the need for brute force imperialism becomes more potent. The weight of debt will soon collapse the American economy, right? They have trillions of dollars in debt, a lot of it to the Chinese, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but the American taxpayers, they pay 500 million, I believe. If not million, it was billion. But they pay a huge sum of money from taxpayers. The taxpayers in the United States pay a huge sum of money every year to the Chinese in the interest rates on all the loans that they have that they have taken from China. So the Americans are basically in permanent debt to the Chinese, and in order to solve this and refinance it and get rid of it, they might just seize all of the oil in Venezuela and beyond to try to basically hoard resources and get rid of this debt before it collapses the American economy. And again, the only reason why the Americans have this debt is again because of capitalism, right? The rich refuse to pay taxes because their capital must expand forever, and the people must be kept at a low wage, and therefore require certain social programs by the state in order to not die and or revolt. And these social programs cannot be paid for because there is no taxation on the rich. And then to fill that gap, the Americans do debt, essentially money printing, right? And a lot of that money, by the way, also goes through the hands of companies. So it's just a direct giveaway to the companies, again, because of capitalism. Therefore, capitalism needs a reset of the imperial order and local social contract. Okay, let me say that again. We are now at a point in Western countries where capitalism needs a reset of the imperial order and the social contract. The imperial order meaning externally, they need to reset their ability to extract resources because too many of these South American countries are becoming nationalistic and have developed far enough that they can no longer be bullied. China is pulling ahead of the West and could, if they wanted to, defend these countries and defend resource extraction, at least in their part of the world. And the social contract within the countries is also falling apart because the usual worker-employer relationship doesn't really hold up in this new economy, this gig economy. And the working class has been kicked down so much by the Epstein class that the social contract whereby everyone pays in and everyone benefits is falling apart. And not only that, workers will soon not be necessary because of technology, right? Because of automation. And in order to deal with this, you need to rewrite the social contract. And to do that, you need a very strong military force to keep your population at bay, right? This is what is called the imperial boomerang. Whatever we do abroad eventually comes back to us. So that is why this is going on. And I thought it was important to say this at the start because I will dive into now the history of Venezuela And this is a territory where we see a lot of criticism coming from the left and the right. Either you're not criticizing Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro enough, or you shouldn't criticize them at all, right? And I'll do a little bit of both. I'll defend them a bit, but also criticize them a bit. But I want to make it crystal clear that any criticism I have of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro is minimal and is irrelevant compared to the main point here, which is that the capitalist machine has invaded Venezuela, and that this is a flagrant violation of international law and is very dangerous and should not have happened. Whatever I may think of Nicolas Maduro is irrelevant when it comes to whether or not the United States should go in and remove the sovereign leader of another country. So I just want to make that crystal clear, because a lot of liberals and Central Intelligence, CIA operatives use the criticisms of Maduro in order to justify this sort of militant imperialist actions like we saw Trump take when he kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. However, I know that a lot of people don't know the history, so I thought, might as well go into it. And in this history, we're also going to find more clear examples that will help you understand how the world works in terms of the imperialists and the anti-imperialists, right? So this theme is going to come up again and again. Hugo Chavez, he was Venezuelan who was Bolivarian first and foremost. Bolivarian means that you believe in the legacy of Bolivar, who is Simón Bolívar, who was a Colombian who got a lot of the indigenous populations together in South America and some of the elites, and created this armed struggle which overthrew the Spanish conquistadors, the Spanish colonialists, and threw them out of South America, and created these sovereign independent national states. So all of the countries in South America came to be through anti-colonial, anti-imperial struggle, and the person who led the struggle was Simón Bolívar. This is very important because for Europeans and Americans to understand the South American left, you need to first and foremost understand that the left is synonymous with sovereignty, with the right to be a country, self-determination. There is no movement in South America that achieved sovereignty and decolonization which was not socialist, first and foremost, right? So socialism in South America can almost be used as a word for nationalism, okay? And this creates a very strong positive tie between anti-imperialism and left-wing social policies. But it also creates a very unhealthy tie between authoritarian nationalism and the left-wing movement. And we're going to explore some of those conflicting themes as we go along. I still see some people in the chat, so feel free to drop a comment, because I think this is going to be the part where you might have some disagreements or would want to challenge something that I'm saying. So I'm happy to include you guys in this part if you do have something to say. So he was an anti-imperialist, a Bolivarian socialist, and I just want to show you some clips that back that up. So here we have an old clip of Hugo Chavez. This is what he looks like, and I'm going to reload it and play it with sound here. 1 second.
Nos acusa a nosotros, a mí me acusan de patrocinar el terrorismo. Son ellos los que patrocinan el terrorismo. Aprovecho para condenar de nuevo, desde el fondo de mi alma y de mis vísceras, al Estado de Israel. Maldito seas, Estado de Israel. Maldito seas, terroristas y asesinos. Y viva el pueblo palestino. Pueblo heroico, pueblo bueno. Ustedes no ven el imperio yanqui. Ustedes no ven la masacre que el Estado genocida de Israel cometió contra un grupo de pacifistas que iban llevando una carga humanitaria al pueblo palestino que está en Gaza, rodeado por todos lados por Israel, no les permiten ni agua. Masacraron a una gente ahí, ustedes lo vieron, ¿verdad? Bueno, vean ustedes Estados Unidos.
Again, I have to say, what a tragedy that this speech was written in probably the 80s. I'm not sure exactly when this is from, but incredible that already back then people were calling out Israel's genocidal mania in terms of their massacring of civilians and their disallowing of access to basic human rights such as food and water. Okay? And I want to make it clear again, it's not a coincidence that this man is sitting here in the 80s talking about Israel as the genocidal maniacs that they are. Yeah? And it's not a coincidence that his movement was demonized by the Americans for so long, and that they have tried many times to kick him out. And here we have a second clip I want to play you that just goes a bit deeper into his different beliefs.
Váyanse al 100 veces.
Ayer estuvo el diablo aquí.
Calling George Bush the devil, by the way, literally the devil.
En este mismo lugar huele a azufre todavía esta mesa donde me ha tocado hablar. Ayer, señoras, señores,
This is the United Nations, by the way. So this is the type of speeches that Hugo Chavez would say at the United Nations podium.
de esta misma tribuna, el señor presidente de los Estados Unidos, a quien yo llamo el diablo, vino aquí hablando como dueño del mundo. ¿Qué modelo de democracia es ese el que se impone a punta de marines, de invasiones, de agresiones y de bombas? A donde quiera que él mira ve extremistas. Yo estoy seguro que te ve a ti, hermano, con ese color.
And here we see a classic example of how Hugo Chavez, who is a socialist in South America, points to a fellow UN member who has, I think it's going to be either a black or brown gentleman, and points out that their struggle is linked. Because again, the socialists in South America are synonymous with anti-imperialism. And he is pointing out to what he sees as his comrades, that this white supremacist system surely looks at his brother with brown or black skin, and sees him as someone to exploit as well.
Y cree que eres un extremista. Con este color, Evo Morales, que vino ayer, el digno presidente de la Bolivia, es un extremista.
And here again, I wanted to mention Evo Morales defending the first indigenous president of South America. And this is not all, right? He also defended many times the leaders of Nicaragua, Ecuador, Cuba, South Africa. So this anti-imperial struggle network is global, right? And he represented a big part of that. That is why the Americans for a long time have tried to discredit him and take him down.
No es que somos extremistas. Lo que pasa es que el mundo está despertando y por todos lados insurgimos los pueblos. El señor presidente vino a hablarle, así lo dijo, hoy quiero hablarles directamente a las poblaciones del Oriente Medio. Mi país desea la paz. Esto es cierto. Si nosotros nos vamos por las calles del Bronx, si nosotros nos vamos por las calles de Nueva York, de Washington, de San Diego, de California, de cualquier ciudad, de San Antonio, de San Francisco, y le preguntamos a la gente en las calles, a los ciudadanos estadounidenses, este país quiere la paz. La diferencia está en que el gobierno de este país, de Estados Unidos, no quiere la paz.
Here he's calling out the US's hypocrisy and democracy, right? He's saying that the people of the United States, of course, want peace. They don't want to go to war with all of these countries for resource extraction, but the government wants war, showing again the hypocrisy of the American lies.
Quiere imponernos su modelo de explotación y de saqueo y su hegemonía a punta de guerras. Quiere la paz. ¿Y qué está pasando en Irak? ¿Y qué ha pasado en el Líbano y en Palestina? ¿Y qué ha pasado en 100 años, pues? En América Latina y en el mundo. Y ahora las amenazas contra Venezuela, nuevas amenazas contra Venezuela, nuevas amenazas contra Irán. ¿Qué le dirían esos pueblos a él? Si esos pueblos pudieran hablar, ¿qué le dirían? Yo se los voy a recoger porque conozco la mayor parte del alma de esos pueblos, los pueblos del sur, los pueblos atropellados. Dirían: Imperio Yankee, go home. Ese sería el grito que brotaría por todas partes si los pueblos del mundo pudieran hablarle a una sola voz al imperio de los Estados Unidos.
Aprovecho para condenar.
And there you go. So this is just to show a little bit of what Hugo Chavez stands for, and again to highlight the fact that there is no separating socialism from anti-imperialism when we're talking in the South American context. So this is Hugo Chavez. Now, he came to power because in 1992 he led a failed coup attempt against the U.S. puppet neoliberal regime, and later he then actually won a presidential election after gaining fame from that failed coup. And in 1998, he won the election with 56% of the vote. So right away, I want to say to people who say he's not democratic, maybe, potentially, I'm not sure, because the writing is very divided, even amongst the left wing. But one thing is for sure, he is not a hardline dictator who rose to power through authoritarianism. He was elected into government. Now, whether or not once he was in government did he let go of some of those democratic beliefs, potentially I see an argument there, but I also see an argument for why he was democratic until the end. In any case, in 1999, right after being elected, 1 year after being elected, he introduced a new constitution that created a stronger executive rule that expanded social rights and mechanisms for direct citizen participation. Here again, I want to highlight that 1 year after being elected democratically, he implements systems for citizens to be able to participate in the decisions of their country through direct democracy. And this goes completely contrary to anyone who's trying to label him as a dictator, right? He was not someone who was afraid of his people. Quite the opposite. He seemed to be wanting to hear their voices and to even at some points arm them, right, through these militias. Next, he nationalized the oil. Okay? This key. Again, socialism, anti-imperialism go hand in hand because socialists like to have the economy under public rule, under the rule of the people, so nationalizing industries, and that disallows for the extraction from Western countries, right? America is going to have a much harder time extracting the oil because Hugo Chavez nationalized the oil. Same story as that we saw with Gaddafi. Same story that we saw with Iran. It's the same story repeating again and again for hundreds of years. He also nationalized electricity, telecommunications, and the steel industries, again, another resource. He then used the oil revenues to fund social programs, housing, healthcare, and education, which all in all lifted millions of people out of poverty and gave a voice to the oppressed people of Venezuela, which he also then used to give a voice to the oppressed people around the world. And this is to summarize all of his greatest achievements. Now, I imagine that all of the commies and socialists watching this are going amazing. So this is the perfect guy. Unfortunately, not. As any human, he had shortcomings, and there are some serious shortcomings. I will say that Hugo Chavez's shortcomings are much smaller than the shortcomings of Nicolas Maduro. So Chavez died in 2013, and therefore there was less time for these shortcomings to kind of develop. But he, unfortunately, Hugo Chavez was part of this very unfortunate story that we see unfold in many leftist South American countries. Let me explain. First, they take power. Because they're anti-imperialist and socialist, they nationalize all the industries and they redistribute the wealth of the country, which exists at that moment, to the hands of the poor. this is a fantastic. This is a fantastic policy, right? I think it should be repeated and continued forever. But once they have done this, unfortunately, we see too often that these socialist leaders become incompetent, and they stop thinking revolutionarily, and they stop innovating in ways for their country's economy to improve and to continue improving the living standards of people. It is rather, I mean, it's not easy, but it is easier to take existing resources, nationalize them, and put them in the hands of the poor than it is to build a new economic model, than to build new industries completely, than to build hospitals, universities, and so on, so on. Of course, not all socialist governments fall into this trap. For example, Cuba, I think, has done quite phenomenal, has done quite well. China has done amazingly, right, in that regard. They have surpassed many of the industries that we have in the West. And they did that by keeping a close nationalized approach to key industries, and also controlling all private industries through government agents in order to develop these industries and make sure that they slowly moved up the ladder of commodity production, right? So in China, they started with very cheap products, a lot of plastic products and agriculture. And then they slowly moved up and upgraded more and more. Then they got into electronics, and now they're going quite far into complicated electronics. And the only industries they have not tackled yet is honestly chip manufacturing and airplane manufacturing, which is like the top of commodity production. And once they master that, which they are by all intents and purposes going to do in the next 5 years, they will become the strongest economy on the planet. By some measures, by the way, they already are the strongest economy on the planet. And so that is a perfect example of how there really is no excuse for left governments to not achieve the same policies. The reasons that they don't, I mean, first, of course, because of US sanctions, right? So the sanctions started in 2005, they were expanded in 2015, and became very intense in 2017. So obviously, these countries all have to develop a situation where they are not allowed to participate in any sort of world economy and cannot trade or export many goods. However, in the case of Venezuela, I don't think this is fully an excuse, right? Of course, it is a struggle, but you can overcome it, like we've seen in other countries. Why is it not an excuse? Because you have oil and gold, right? Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro are sitting on mountains and infinite supplies almost of oil and gold. There will always be a buyer for oil and gold. And we have, in Venezuela and South America, we have silver, we have iron. So you actually have almost all of the resources you need in order to create the machinery for new industries. Okay? And even if we didn't have all of those resources, you could still create older industries that could run a country, right? We have agriculture, we have iron, we have gold, we have oil. We have fresh water, right? Essentially, we have everything that you need to sustain a country. It is not like Cuba that doesn't have all of these resources and therefore is slowly being starved out, right? So there is no real excuse. If you nationalize these resources and use them smartly, you could develop like any other country. You could develop like Norway. You could develop like China, and get quite far ahead. And you would not even need to necessarily do too much trade or imperialism, because you can just use the own resources that you have in your own country. So this is the great disaster of these the unfortunate disaster of some of these socialist movements, because they don't take those secondary and tertiary steps after nationalizing the oil, right? So in the case of Venezuela, they became heavily reliant on this oil economy, making them very vulnerable to price drops because they didn't further develop other industries once they got that money from the oil. Instead, they continued to keep things as running as usual, expecting to always be able to live off of just selling oil, right? Which was not the case because OPEC and other imperialist countries, then drop the oil in order to cripple your economy, and it worked. It completely decimated the Venezuelan economy. And this lack of economic development, again, it's under the context of colonial struggle, but you still have to do something about it. You can't just sit back and watch it happen and rely on just one resource extraction of oil, right? And this economic collapse is you cannot ignore it. People in Venezuela were hungry for a long time. I remember from being in Bolivia visiting not so long ago, seeing Venezuelan refugees in Bolivia. Look, if you have refugees from a country going to Bolivia, you know it's fucked up. Like, you know that they are fleeing truly terrible conditions, because we are usually the ones going to other countries, not the other way around. So there is no denying it. People in Venezuela, especially after 2016, have lived very, very impoverished lives. And I don't think it's fair to not be self-critical of that in the left movement. And this is then the most unfortunate part, is that when those people who are struggling to survive start to speak out against the government and protest, many of them, by the way, from a Marxist, truly leftist, socialist point of view, instead of being met with new policies or giving in to their demands, they are cracked down on using the same militias that were meant to be anti-imperial, right? So Hugo Chavez sees all of this, and Nicolas Maduro after sees all of this unrest coming from a hungry population, and instead of finding ways to overcome the challenges and giving in to some of their demands, he sends his militia forces on them to kind of quiet them down through violence. And this is to me a bit unacceptable, right? These militia forces are meant to be anti-imperialist first and foremost. You cannot use them on your own population. And of course, the population, let's say the opposition party, is full of infiltrants who are anti-socialist and who are part of the imperial class, right? Who are American CIA operatives. So that is no excuse, because you are now living in a country with actual hunger, with actual power outages, with actual people who are actually suffering, right? So when they rise up, it's not enough of an excuse to say, oh, but there are infiltrants among them. No, you must address their needs, because that is the point of a socialist state, first and foremost. So this is the biggest shortcomings. And of course, I want to say that this is because that this happened mostly under Nicolas Maduro and less so under Hugo Chavez, but both of them helped set up this over-reliance on oil that led to this situation. Now, again, because I've criticized a socialist country, I want to make sure to give you a realistic point of view. I don't want your takeaway to be that, so it is true that they were terrible leaders and everyone hated them. No. Okay? A lot of people in Venezuela understood the struggles they were going through and still supported these presidents all the way through and still voted for them all the way through. So it is not that they're anti-democratic, okay? To the extent that is being said in Western media. So just to show you that, I want to give you a video here of some of the support we saw recently for Nicolas Maduro. This was after he was captured. And as you can see, we have hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans protesting for the return of Nicolas Maduro. Yeah. So anyone who tries to convince you that because of these shortcomings, which are legitimate, let me take a step back. Anyone who tries to tell you that there are not legitimate shortcomings of the Venezuelan socialist state is lying to you, because there are. But anyone who tries to tell you that those shortcomings are the defining principles of the Venezuelan socialist state is also lying to you. The truth is, most people in these countries support their socialist governments. Most people understand the benefits that they have gained from them and stand by them despite the shortcomings. also because they're able to contextualize it in the reality, which is American sanctions and constant American pressure to collapse your economy and your government, right? And throughout that, a lot of Venezuelans, as you see, stayed step in step, stayed very loyal to the Maduro Chavista regime. Government, sorry, not regime. All right. So I think that's enough about the history of Venezuela. I would say a few more things about Nicolas Maduro, but I think you get the gist of what happened. So now to round off this phenomenal, 1 hour long video, I do want to get into what we need to do next as Europeans and as South Americans, right? I am half, so I will give you both perspectives. People in Europe, listen, you need to first and foremost protest that this violates international law. Why? Because if you do not, then Greenland will be next, and after that will be Ukraine. Or maybe Ukraine first, I don't know. But the idea that anyone is going to take you seriously when you are being invaded and when the Americans or the Russians come to take parts of our continent is laughable. Because we have shown now that we do not care about international law, right? The UK was with the United States just the other day, taking oil tankers from Venezuela. And none of the European leaders condemned the attack on Venezuela. They all gave this centrist line that, oh, Nicolas Maduro was a bad leader, so we don't share any tears for what happened. So if we don't stand up and protest this in Europe, then I promise you there will be no one left to turn to once the Americans come and do the same shit to us. And they will do the same to us because this is imperialism. And at some point, South America will not be enough, and then they'll come to Europe. Now, given Europe does not have that many resources left, so it will be for different reasons, but they will come nonetheless. For people in South America, I would say we must protect our sovereignty. Cuba, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, these are countries that I expect the Americans to do similar military actions against. I think they are next. And I hope that by seeing Venezuela, it is crystal clear to any South American who is still holding out hope. It is clear that the BRICS nations are not going to come to save you. The Chinese, the Russians will not come to save you. The only people you can rely on to defend the sovereignty of South America are the South American people. And because of that, you need to stay militant, and you should start to advocate for a sort of South American NATO, right? Venezuela on their own would probably, even in a guerrilla war scenario, eventually be overrun by the Americans. Or at least they would be able to do sufficient damage that resistance would be horrific. Like, right, the scenes in the country would be horrific, and overall you would lose more than you gain by resisting. However, if you create an alliance between multiple countries, particularly Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, then you're starting to look at a force which could realistically hold back the Americans and make this very, very difficult for them. And this is not an uncommon idea, by the way. There is an idea called ALBA, which is the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of South America. Funny enough, Hugo Chavez, out of all people, since we were discussing him today, Hugo Chavez was a big supporter of this idea. And I think that in honor of the Venezuela he tried to build and all of the good that he tried to do, we should try to revive this idea and make sure that it is front and center in this time of American imperialism. And very interesting here, just to round off the video, I have this speech by Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia. And I hope that by leaving with this at the end, we can have some sort of optimistic outlook for the future, and some inspiration for what has to be done in these challenging times. I zoomed in a bit too much. Okay, there we go.
Quiere acabar la democracia en Colombia.
I'm gonna restart that because he says something fantastic there at the start.
De pedófilos quiere acabar la democracia en Colombia.
A clan of pedophiles want to end the democracy in Colombia. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Duro, sí, pero ahí está la realidad. Y para que no salga la lista, entonces nos envían acorazados a matar pescadores de esta ciudad. Y amenazar al vecino, que si dictador o no, ¿cómo que el pueblo de Colombia va a aplaudir que invadan a su hermano, que no es el presidente, sino el pueblo de Venezuela? ¿Cuándo? Seríamos así de traidores y de vendidos, de que nuestra propia sangre la traicionamos, o el pueblo del Ecuador, o el pueblo de Panamá, o el pueblo de Venezuela no es nuestro propio pueblo. Entonces quieren que el presidente haga lo que quería hacer Duque, cobarde, prestar las tierras de Colombia para que desde ahí se invadiera a un país hermano que tiene la misma historia que nosotros, porque allá nació Bolívar y vino a morir aquí, en esta ciudad. No se puede. Presidente de Colombia que haga eso, presidente maldito por las generaciones futuras, porque nunca será olvidado como un traidor.
And there you go. Whoever sells out the next South American country will forever be known. Sorry, that was John Owens. Whoever sells out the next South American country will forever be known as a traitor to Simón Bolívar and the anti-imperialist struggle. For our countries are meant to be sovereign and not part of the American national project, not part of the American idea of manifest destiny, and definitely not part of the American military machine, which is looking for a third world war. All right. Thank you guys for joining on this long mission of decoding what happened in Venezuela. Not only exactly what happened over the weekend, but also what happened leading up to this in terms of history and what will likely happen next and what to do about it. This is Eurozone. Usually I have Ruben with me, but he's at home feeling a bit sick. But yeah, we make a lot of videos on anti-imperialist struggle, both on Palestine, but also South America. And very soon, it seems like Greenland. That's actually going to be the next topic. So if you're watching this live, you stay. If you're watching this on the YouTube video, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.